We're going to start with Jillian Gores, joining us today from JA Counter. Jill is a certified healthcare reform consultant. Recently, she has been active educating and strategizing with businesses big and small in how to implement, adjust, and react to the Affordable Care Act. Wow. Here to let us know what the Affordable Care Act means and how it may impact farm businesses, whether or not you currently offer health insurance, Jill Gores. Jill?
Thank you. Good morning. Again, my name is Jill Gores, and I just want to introduce Cindy Fedrosi. She's in the second row here. She can wave. She's also with me. Her and I work on a lot of farm clients together, so I wanted her to be here as well, just in case there's questions. And thanks for having me, Bakke. We're excited to be here to speak today. So what I did was I kind of, it's a very, very big topic to cover in 20, 30 minutes. You guys have copies of the slides, and there's also a couple handouts that I'm going to refer to. So we'll leave time at the end for questions, because when I typically present, everything that we say can trigger questions different for everyone. So if you're comfortable asking them in a setting, please feel free to do so, and we'll address those. Or if you want to talk to us after, there should be contact information in there as well. So figure that out. There's three basic buckets that I try to talk about when we go through the presentation. And so I start with individual insurance, and the big things that are happening right now are at the exchanges or marketplaces. So if you're a Wisconsin resident, you go through the federal marketplace if you want to receive a subsidy. So those two bullets are really falling under that individual market piece. So I'm going to talk about that quite a bit at the beginning. Then I'm going to go into small group. Small group is defined currently as 2 to 50 employees. So we have a lot of farm clients that also have small group plans, even if it's just a husband and wife. Possibly they have a couple other people on the farm that they're insuring as well, and that transition has changed to community rates. So I'll talk about that a little bit, and then I'll talk a little bit about keeping the plan that you have that may no longer be considered Affordable Care Act compliant, or ACA. So if you hear me refer to the letters ACA, it means Affordable Care Act. And then I am going to touch on the 50-plus employer mandate piece. So as I mentioned, there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to fly. So if you have questions, just let me know. The first piece is the individual mandate. So you may or may not be aware that everyone is supposed to have coverage starting this year. And when they file their taxes this year, they will be providing documentation that says that they had what's called minimum essential coverage, or MEC. You can get those, through government plans, through the marketplace. You can get them from an employer plan, whether you're offering it or you're on somebody else's. And then you can also still get private insurance or individual insurance. So the penalties are listed. For most people, it's going to be 1% of their income if they've chosen to go uninsured this year. So if you go file your taxes next year and you don't have coverage, for most people, it'll be 1% of their income. If you, for example, don't have an income, the floor or the lowest, it'll be as $95 for a single this year, or $295 for a family. And then as you can see, that increases over the years. The other disclosure I'll put out there is, as you know, things are changing pretty rapidly in our industry right now, and we get updates. Actually, we just got one this morning that I read before I came on things that are constantly shifting and moving in the whole healthcare marketplace. Some of the things that are a little bit further out, we don't talk a lot about, simply because we think that there potentially could be changes in the future. But I'll put as much information as I can up there. So if you are on individual insurance, or if you wanted to have an individual plan, there's a couple different routes, and the health insurance exchanges or the federal marketplace is where Wisconsin residents would go in the event that they've qualified for a subsidy. We're neighboring to Minnesota, so MNsure's up there as well. Minnesota's state-based or state-run, and Wisconsin is federally run, so we have the federal marketplace and they have MNsure. So last year, just kind of recapping what it looked like before, it was open, if you will, on October 1st. They had quite a few problems. It didn't actually run properly. Between October and December, they did a lot of fixes. They were able to get people through the system. December through now, there's a lot of uncertainty even today when the marketplace opens on November 15th, how efficient or effective it might be. However, they're confident that it will run better than last year. They are easing away from the statement that it's going to be efficient. They think there's still a couple years with technical fixes before it's running very, very well and efficiently. But they feel strongly that it should be good starting November 15th. And then if you are going through the marketplace, it will close on February 15th. And in order to have a January 1st effective date, you have to be enrolled by December 15th. So there's 30 days between the day it opens until the day people would need to be signed up if they want a January 1st effective date. Following up with that, so why would people go to the federal marketplace? The big reason is because they qualify for a subsidy. So if your income is under 400% of the federal poverty level, then you potentially could qualify for a subsidy. And the only place to collect your subsidy or receive your subsidies if you do so through the federal marketplace. So basically when you log in, you fill out an application assuming your modified adjusted gross income is under 400% of the federal poverty level, then you would have the opportunity to have potential plan reductions for out-of-pocket costs, but also premium reductions. And then obviously the individual, whoever's shopping, would compare the plans, make the choice that fits best for them, and then sign up through the federal marketplace. If you offer a group health insurance plan, I just like to bring this up. It's called, they titled it the family glitch. But basically what happened last year with some of the definitions changing on how to determine household income and how employers determine if coverage is offered to an employee and it's deemed affordable, they changed that to a W-2. There's a safe harbor to determine, so you just have to look at their W-2 to determine if it's affordable. And I'll talk about that in a minute. However, this affects this because they didn't change the definition on who qualifies for subsidies. So if you're offering a plan, you have to offer it to your employees that work 30 hours a week or more. And even if they don't take it because they can go to the marketplace and get maybe a less cost plan or a plan that they prefer, they would technically potentially not be able to qualify for subsidies. There's a couple really, really unique situations where somebody would maybe still qualify for a subsidy if they had child support that made them have no income or those types of things. But for the most part, people that have access to a group plan, meaning they're an employee and they're working 30 hours a week or more, do not have access to subsidies. And sometimes there's a disconnect there because there's not a ton of information that's been shared about that, but that's really important that we talk about quite a bit. So just as an example, I wanted to show you a family of 4 and what the federal poverty limits looked like in 2013. And you'll notice it's 2013, and if you look in your packet, one of the handouts is a document that looks like this. This has your 2014 numbers on the bottom of it. So if you wanted to look at the updated one, I just had this slide already pulled together. But basically, a family of 4 making $94,200 a year or less could potentially qualify for a subsidy. So this is usually where we start with individuals to find out if it makes sense for them to look inside the marketplace, or if they are over 400% of the federal poverty level, then it might not make sense to look, because there's typically the same plans offered inside and outside of the marketplace. Following me? This page, yeah, go ahead.
So the difference between being in the marketplace or just going out to a company, the same plans are there, is whether you get a subsidy or not?
Right, and the same rates. So what we've been finding is that folks that have possible access to a subsidy are definitely going to go through that channel, and folks that don't are going to look and maybe go direct with just an application and submitting it directly to the carrier. The rates are the same and the plans are the same. They don't have to be. There could be a plan that's in either out and not in. There are lots of plans available on outside of the marketplace that are not inside the marketplace. But typically everything that's inside the marketplace is also offered outside the marketplace. Are you confused yet? You've got a lot more slides to go. So this is just an example. So the other document I put inside your packet, it just shows you based on the county that you live in, what insurance carriers are in that marketplace. So if you just looked at Dunn County, which is where we are, you can see that Health Plans, Health Traditions, which is mail-based, and Security Health Plan are the 2 providers that are in and out. So they're bold and in that red formatting. They have plans both available inside the marketplace and outside the marketplace. The other carriers listed are not inside the marketplace. Okay? And then the codes are on the back. So I just thought that might be a good resource for anybody who is interested in that individual. The last thing I'm going to revert back, just so you know, this is the state program or the Medicaid programming. on the top there, so it kind of gives you an idea of who's eligible for some of the programs like Badger Care or some of the Medicaid programs that are out there, and what level of income they would be at and what category they would fall into. So depending on if anybody has any interest in that, I just thought it might be a good resource. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears now, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about small group. So community rates is probably the biggest impact for that 2 to 50 market. If you guys, possibly some of you may have applied for a group plan and had to fill out those 9-page uniform applications where everybody that's eligible fills out all their health information, you submit them to the different carriers, and then the carriers give you a rate based on your risk, and then you can either accept or deny it, and then every year when you get your renewal, you could do that process again if you wanted to, but you didn't have to, it was your choice. That is basically obsolete in the fully insured small group market. What they are now rating on is age, family composition, which means if you have a spouse, you can be charged more than if you're single. Or if you have children, they can charge you more, so they can charge based on the number of people. That's what that family composition piece is. Geographic area. When this first came out, we didn't know exactly how they were gonna do the geographic area, but it's basically boiled down to by county. So that's kind of how their rating is based on what county you live in. And then the tobacco use. So they have the ability to charge more for tobacco users than non-tobacco users. What we've been seeing is that some carriers have chosen to do this, while other carriers have decided not to administer it. So depending on which carrier you go with, you may or may not be asked that question of if you've used tobacco in the last 18 months. And if you, it can't be for religious or medicinal, or there's a big, it's a very long statement. If you have used tobacco, you have the opportunity to go into their tobacco cessation program. Typically they're online, and then they can still charge you the non-tobacco rate if you complete that. So we actually don't have very many people that are getting charged the tobacco rate. However, the carriers can upcharge for that now going forward. And then obviously I already mentioned they're no longer taking those big health questionnaires and assessing the number of people and the health risk and using gender to rate any longer, okay? So some of you who have those small group plans may have realized that if you were on the low end of the risk factor, which was 0.7 in Wisconsin, you were in this preferred category, and then if you were on the high end for risk, you were on that top category, which was a 1.3 risk factor, and there potentially could have been up to an 86% difference between the exact same plan of what people were getting charged. It was just based on what they were submitting on those health questionnaires. And what happened in 2014 when we went to community rate is they took away the application process and came out with what's called a community rate, or there was no adjustment based on health risks. So the rates were published, and it was just based on your age, where you lived, how many people you had in your family, and then if you were tobacco, depending on which carrier you're with. So it kind of moved everything together. So some people, if you can imagine, had this healthier risk. They had really, really big increases. And people that were possibly at that higher end maybe even saw a slight decrease or somewhat of a flat renewal. It just depended on where they were on that spectrum. The other thing they could do historically was they could have a 7-to-1 differential between young and old on the health plan. Now they can only have a 3-to-1 differential. So when they're giving the rates out, every age is a different rate. So that was another impact to the rates. So what happened, and I'm gonna, before I talk about this slide, last Thanksgiving-ish, there was a lot on the news about if you like your plan, you can keep it. And that kind of got brought back up to the surface. And what happened in the small group market is our state decided to allow groups that wanted to keep their in-force plans to be able to do so potentially until 2017. Historically, all the plans were gonna end this year and everyone was gonna be moving to community rates. But we were able to keep it potentially up till 2017. And why I keep saying potentially is because there can be changes and the carriers are gonna have to continue to offer those plans to their groups. So we're seeing a lot of groups that haven't switched to the community rate yet. If they were on that lower end of risk, they can have anywhere from that 0.7 potentially up to 1.1, where they may have wanted to just stay put. They can't make any plan changes, they can't do any carrier changes. but it's possible now that we'll have some groups, and it's called grandmothering. So if you've been following healthcare reform at all, there was grandfathering way back at the beginning, and then this stage was called grandmothering, which happened about last November. And that's where we are today with the small groups. So some small groups will be on community rates. If you're a brand new group and you're looking at insurance, you will be given community rates if you were to look in the marketplace or the insurance world today. And then the other big piece that we get a lot of questions on is the shop. And the shop is what was meant to be the federal marketplace for groups. So I just talked about the federal marketplace where you can get your subsidies. Completely detached from that is what's called the shop or the shop exchange. And the shop exchange is for small groups, as of today, 50 or less employees, that are interested in potentially looking at the tax credit that you can get if you have wages under a certain level and employee count under a certain level. So it's a sliding scale, the information's on the slide, but basically if you talk to your accountant or your team in the back, and it's possible that there could be a subsidy or a tax credit for your health insurance on a group standpoint, you would need to go through the shop starting this year in order to get that. Historically, they were allowing people to just submit it, but now that the shop is open, you have to go through the shop in order to get that. Yeah. All right, so now we're gonna switch to the third bucket, and I'm gonna fly through this. I'm guessing there's not a lot of employers that have over 50 employees, so that's why I'm gonna fly, but if anybody has questions, obviously you have the slides, and I can go through anything you want more detail on. So, an applicable large employer is somebody that has 50 or more full-time equivalents. So you need to obviously count your employees to find out if you have over 50 full-time equivalents, and if you do, you're subject to what's called this pay or play, or the official title is employer mandate. The employer mandate says you either have to offer coverage to your full-time employees, or you have to pay a penalty to the government. This was supposed to go into effect this year, but it got delayed, and then it got delayed for 50 to 99 until 2016. So there was some transition that's been happening over the years. So just keep that in mind if you qualify for this, and if you have questions, I'm happy to help. This kind of outlines it a little bit more. Small employers, you're not subject to the employer mandate. If you do not offer a group plan, you will not have to pay a penalty to the government. If you're in the mid-size employers, 50 to 99, they delayed the penalty until 2016. So you have next year where you're still gonna have to file your paperwork, but you wouldn't be penalized if you weren't meeting the requirements. And employers that have over 100 employee full-time equivalents, they would be subject to the penalty starting next year. So they will be submitting for the first time their paperwork this coming 2016, first quarter 2016 is when they'll file for healthcare reform. There was relief, so if anybody wants to talk about that, we can go in further detail. The other thing to keep in mind is if you just peak over that 50 full-time equivalent mark, but you have less than 30 that are actually working 30 hours a week or more, you get to subtract out the first 30 employees from your penalty payment to the government. So there's some groups that are just barely over that 50 mark, so they have to qualify for this and they have to do the reporting. But because they maybe only have 15 true full-time, 30-hour a week or more employees, they won't actually have a penalty to pay in. So if this is part of kind of your world, let me know and we can talk about it further. So there's two different penalty options if you do qualify for a penalty. Number one is if you're just not offering, you're gonna pay $2,000 a year on every full-time employee minus the first 30. Okay, so you would pay on 20 if you had 50 full-time employees. The second penalty option is if you're offering coverage, but it's not deemed affordable or credible, then and one of your employees goes to the federal exchange, purchases a plan, and gets a subsidy. Once they receive that subsidy, that triggers the other form of a penalty, which is a $3,000 per person that goes and gets a subsidy penalty. Okay? There's a lot of people smiling right now, for those of you in the back. Yes. Yeah.
Jill, these penalties you're talking about here are for employers, but are there also penalties for individuals who don't have, everybody's supposed to get insurance now?
Yep.
If you don't get insurance, is there a penalty for the individual that comes along at that time?
Yep, that was on the first slide. So if we go back here, The penalty for 2014, sorry, I'm not supposed to walk, is 1% of your income, and then it's $95 for single or $295 for family, whichever is greater. So for most folks this year, if you're uninsured, it'll likely be 1% of your income. Does that answer your question?
Right, and so that happens is when you file your tax return, say you were gonna get a refund, they're gonna deduct that money out of your refund, you get that much dollars less, correct?
Correct. Yep. Does anybody else have questions on this piece? So we talked about the penalties, and then the $3,000 penalty if it isn't affordable or credible. Basically, there's an actuarial value. If you remember the metal levels, some plans are gold, some are silver, some are bronze, some are platinum. Every plan now has to meet an actuarial value. So your plan has to have a 60% actuarial value or better, which most plans do that are available in the fully insured marketplace. You're not going to have a concern with that. And then you've got to also have it be affordable, which means if you're offering a plan to your employees, the portion that you're charging them can't be more than 9.5% of their W-2 income. So you can back that number in. If you look at your wages, you just have to make sure whatever portion you're requiring them to pay isn't more than 9.5% of their W-2 income. That did go up to 9.56%. There was an adjustment, but they only changed it in the law. They didn't change it in the safe harbor. And most employers are using the safe harbor because that allows them not to have to get their employees' household income. They only have to get the W-2 income. So rather than going and asking for household income on their employees, they want to use the safe harbor approach, which means they can just look at the employees' wages. So calculating full-time employees, I'm going to fly through this. You guys have the slides. Basically, you're adding up the hours and then you're dividing it and coming up with your FTE. And then once you identify who is a full-time equivalent, there's different tracking mechanisms for variable hour employees. And then if somebody's consistently working 29 hours a week or less, they would be considered part-time and you would not need to offer them coverage. But you are supposed to be tracking over the course of a year, which obviously there's times when people are working more than others in your industry, that you would want to make sure that from a consistent standpoint, you're either over 50 FTEs or under 50 FTEs pretty consistently. And I can go into the standard stability and administrative period if you guys need me to. And then there's also seasonal, which is 120 days. You can use a 6-month period, so every 6 months you can cycle your counting if you want to use that, versus a year. Some people, it just depends on what makes sense for each group. And then the notices and reporting. So if you have 50 full-time equivalents or more, there is going to be reporting that's due to the government every year around tax time. If you file electronically, I think it's February something. Somebody else knows that more than I do. And if you file on paper, it's, I believe, end of March. Oh, February 28th is when the employee has to get a copy also. So employers are going to be giving employees a document that they can use when they file their taxes. It could be coming from the carrier, it could be coming from the employer. It depends on if they're self-insured or self-funded. So there's a lot of reporting stuff that's going to happen this year so that everybody kind of knows what to do at the end of the year. And then that first time anyone will report is 2016. So we've got a year, if you will, to kind of get all that ironed out. And then the big thing that they wanted to just touch on is HRAs, FSAs, reimbursing claims. It used to be very common for a group to set up a document that allowed them to just use pre-tax dollars to pay for claims. Really what's happening in the marketplace is they've come out very clearly and said that in really no way, shape, or form can you have an HRA or a health reimbursement account without an underlying major group medical plan. And it has to be group, it can't be individual. So that's changed this industry quite a bit because there was a lot of people that would allow employees to submit claims and pay the claims, and maybe those employees were on individual plans, and that's not compliant anymore. So starting last year, January 1, or for those that had plan years throughout this year, they would be ending, and you're technically not supposed to have those going forward. And there is a violation, and it applies to all sizes. Single, yeah.
So, Jill, if I've got a deal where I don't offer health insurance to my employees, but I say
unless you offer a major group medical plan underneath that for the employee, so that premiums, individual premiums can no longer be pre-tax and all, you can do it, it just can't be pre-tax. It's all after-tax dollars. It's basically just giving them more in wages or bonusing them or doing it in that regard. Does that trigger any more questions? This is a big one. So the group health plan needs to be underneath, then you can layer an HRA or a reimbursement account on top of it. The reason why, and this comes up a lot, but basically the way that they're considering an HRA an actual health plan, health plans can't charge for preventive services and they can't have annual dollar limits. So that's what makes those HRAs non-compliant going forward, if anybody's curious on that piece. There are some changes to FSAs as well, but the other thing that's big to change with FSAs is you used to be able to have a flexible spending account for your employees, and then they could elect their own dollars to go in pre-tax, and then they could pay for their claims if they wanted to that way. In order for somebody to be eligible on an FSA or a flexible spending account, they have to also be eligible for your major medical plan. So that's changed that market as well. So if either of you, or if any of you have situations like that and you want to talk about it, I'll be here. Because they're usually pretty specific on what you're doing with your contract, if you will, or how you set up your program. And so if anybody wants to talk about that, we can do that. Cadillac tax, I don't talk a lot about. I just put it up there because it is on the horizon, and it's based on the value of your coverage premium and any HSA contributions you may be making to your employees or that you're making for yourself. And ultimately, it's just stating that if an individual has more than $10,200 or a family $27,500 in costs for their plan a year, that it will be taxed at a 40% rate. We think this will change, or could change, I shouldn't say will, but it's kind of out there a little ways, so we try not to spend a ton of time outside of letting people know it's there and letting them know where they hit and in reference to that number. So